To be fair to the Minister, I do acknowledge that you did arrange to organise this meeting last week. That's when you announced it. And you did bring forward the scheduled, I think, June the 21st meeting of the Retail Forum forward to discuss this most pressing of issues. I want to firstly congratulate you on your appointment. It's the first opportunity I've had to do so in this chamber, and I've no doubt that you'll enjoy the experience. You're working with good officials who put the interests of the country, jobs and enterprise first. When I first raised this issue last month, frankly, Minister, the government showed little or no interest in bringing the supermarkets to heel over the inflated prices that customers were paying at the checkout. But since I have been raising this issue consistently over the last period of time, the issue has begun to snowball over the last few weeks, and suddenly now it seems that all sides of the House are coming around to mine and the Labour Party's thinking on this issue, namely that we have to do something. We have to do something to tackle the elevated prices of basic grocery items. Now, the supermarkets will, of course, have us believe that this is some sort of zero-sum game, where either the customer pays elevated prices or the primary producers take the hit. But the truth is that these giant supermarkets and food corporations have plenty of room to manoeuvre on price and still return a more than healthy profit. Now, we know, Minister, that input costs are stabilising and falling in many cases, but customers simply are not seeing the benefits that they ought to see. And the heat applied to the supermarkets on this pressing issue over the last few weeks, thanks to the Labour Party's focus on the issue, has resulted in some action, albeit superficial action, with price reductions on milk and butter, as you acknowledged yourself. I fear, however, that this is nothing more than an exercise in public relations, attempting to show the public, government and indeed regulators that the sector can somehow regulate itself. But we know that this is not the case, and the evidence of that is in our weekly shopping trolleys and baskets. And there is an issue with lack of transparency in the goods sitting on our supermarket shelves, and that's at the root of the problem that consumers are experiencing at this moment in time. Now, for a month now, I've been consistently calling on the CCPC to initiate an investigation into possible price gouging in the sector. And this isn't, Minister, a left-wing conspiracy theory and something that we've dreamed up. We can read the data too. We read the research. We understand what the European Central Bank is saying, for example. And the European Central Bank have made it very, very clear. They have pointed to excess profit-making in corporations across the European Union as a significant factor in food inflation, which continues to grow at a multiple of the overall baseline inflation rate. And when I first raised this issue on the floor of this House with the Taoiseach simply tried to bat the question away, expressing his confidence that inflation will fall and that will sooner or later be reflected on reduced prices on the supermarket shelves. But as the issue gained traction, there has been a marked change in attitude on the government benches, and I suppose that comes better late than never. And I do acknowledge, Minister, your own personal interest in this particular issue and your public pronouncements in recent days. But now, as I've been telling you for a month, the government have at last admitted that there are weapons at your disposal to tackle elevated grocery prices. And we'll see what happens this week, Minister, when you do tomorrow meet with the Retail Forum. But I hope you will go further than a simple plea to the multiples to bring their prices down. And I'm grateful that you acknowledge my own function in establishing the Retail Forum, a very important organisation that represents the interests of the most significant private sector employer in this country. About 300,000 plus people are employed in retail. But let's not either overstate the significance of what the Retail Forum can actually do. We know that the Retail Forum itself is a consultative forum and is not established on a statutory basis. There are good people involved from academia, from industry and from other interests. And I'm happy to back your initiative, Minister, but we really need to see delivery in regard to what is discussed tomorrow, and timelines indeed for ensuring that the input costs, as they are reducing, that we see changes in terms of what consumers are being charged for the things that we all depend on. What we do need to do is and what we need to see is something along the lines of what the Greek government has done in sitting down with the retailers and food industry and agreeing, for example, maximum prices on over 50 staple items in the weekly shopping basket. My understanding is that the Greek administration did that late last year. And this should happen in concert with an investigation by the CCPC into possible price gouging in the food and grocery sector. But despite having a string of regulators in this country, prices aren't regulated, not only in the food and grocery sector, but in energy, telecoms and mortgages, which could all do with a bit more than the light touch regulation we are seeing across the economy. And we have plenty of regulators, in theory, in this country, but they've limited capacity and limited mandate, but we don't see a lot of enforced regulation. And it's time that these consumer watchdogs were given the teeth to bite instead of just barking and whining in hope that industry will come to heel. And since it is our highlighting of this issue over the last month that has led to this Sinn Féin motion, Sinn Féin proposing this motion, we in the Labour Party, of course, have no difficulty in supporting it. I'm glad that the government will not oppose it. Minister, we're told constantly that competition is a good thing, and I agree. Competition in markets is a good thing. And competition in marketplaces usually manages to bring costs for consumers down. That's what we're always being taught, and that's what the theory is. But the practice sometimes, and the outcome, is not what we often expect. Your competition is a good thing once it works for the benefit of the ordinary punter. But the big players simply can't have it all their own way. And when markets are being abused and customers are being exploited, then the state and regulation needs to step in. And I am pleased to see government, albeit late in the day, responding to our pleas to focus on this quite literal bread and butter issue. But I hope you'll go further in delivering a real and lasting solution on this issue until the food industry and the supermarket retailers can demonstrate that they're capable of setting fair and sustainable prices for their products. Now, this is, as has been said previously, and you will acknowledge this, an issue that disproportionately impacts the less well-off, who spend, of course, a far greater proportion of their income on basic groceries. In a week when the government is scratching its head, wondering what to do with all the excess revenue at its disposal, we can't countenance that there are working families out there struggling to put food on the table. And I would point you to yesterday's Social Justice Ireland analysis, Minister, which illustrates the extent of the problem and the disparities and the gross inequalities that we're experiencing in this country. 677,000 of our people are living in Ireland in 2023, when we are talking about record budgetary surpluses, living below the poverty line. And I hope you agree with me that that is unconscionable. It is immoral, it is unfair, it is wrong, and it needs to be put right. The multinational food producers and the joint supermarket multiples have, as I said, been having it all their own way for far too long. They did make a fortune during the pandemic and are seeking to maintain those artificially high prices and profits in a post-pandemic world, off the back of hard-pressed customers. The working people of Ireland, and indeed primary producers, cannot be made to foot the bill for the greed of these giant corporations any longer. And it is now up to government to use the tools it has at its disposal, tools that you acknowledge rather belatedly that you have, to address this situation once and for all. And I note what you said earlier on in relation to price controls. And I would be, generally speaking, one of the last people to reach for the weapon of price controls, generally speaking. But as I said earlier on, when competition is failing and when the market is being abused by big players in that market, then I think regulation and the enforcement of regulation that is there needs to be used in the interests of consumers. Of course, the legislation providing for maximum price orders was legislated for in 2007 by a government in which Minister Cleary served. So there was an acknowledgement then that potentially in the future markets could be abused and prices may need to be controlled under what the legislation terms as abnormal circumstances. And we are living in abnormal circumstances at the moment. And there are a number of ways in which government can deal with this. For example, you could as some other governments across the European Union are considering, slap windfall taxes, not just on energy companies who are posting hyper profits under abnormal circumstances, but on major retailers as well, and that is something that has been considered and something that has been proposed by the trade union movement across the European Union as well. I will conclude, Minister, by asking you to do the following. I think you should ask tomorrow the supermarkets themselves to stop guarding their profits like the third secret of Fatima and publish their profits so people can make up their own mind. You can, and I ask you again, to request the CCPC to undertake a market analysis of the supermarket sector in Ireland. And I would say to you as well to certainly keep in your back pocket the threat of maximum price orders until supermarkets come to heel, and do the right thing by consumers who shop with them.